From the time she could remember, the narrator's life was defined by the golden desert horizons of Saudi Arabia rather than the bustling streets of Pakistan where she was born. She was only 10 years old when her father was offered a stable job in the kingdom, a chance he seized immediately. For the family, it meant leaving behind familiar faces and streets for a land of different customs, languages, and rules. Her mother and father saw it as a step toward financial security, a way to give their only child opportunities they themselves had never known. The move was not without challenges. She was a young girl adjusting to a new school system, surrounded by unfamiliar accents and traditions. At first, the Arabic language felt like a wall between her and the world outside their modest home. But children adapt quickly. Within a few years, she could speak and read Arabic fluently, a skill that would later play an unforeseen role in the most significant decisions of her life. By her teenage years, she was comfortable in this foreign land, wearing its culture like a second skin. Pakistan, meanwhile, became more of a distant idea than a reality. Family back home would occasionally call, sending blessings and stories of life in their town, but she had no real connection to them beyond her parents' memories. Saudi Arabia was her present and, she believed, her future. Her parents often told her that one day she would return to Pakistan to marry, as was the custom, and that she should keep her ties to her roots strong. She nodded politely when they said such things, never imagining that those promises would one day become a point of conflict. By the time she turned 22, she was a confident young woman, educated and aware of the world around her. She had grown up in an environment where modern conveniences coexisted with conservative traditions, learning to navigate both with ease. It was during this period that her parents began to speak more seriously about her marriage. The idea did not surprise her. She had always known it would come. What startled her was the certainty in her parents' voices when they told her they had someone in mind, her cousin in Pakistan. They spoke of him as though the decision were obvious, almost inevitable. He was part of the family, they reminded her, and marrying within the family had always been their way. It kept wealth and property secure, maintained family honor, and ensured that a bride would be among people she already knew. But while her parents saw these as advantages, she saw them as chains. Her upbringing in Saudi Arabia had exposed her to different ways of thinking. She had heard stories of cousin marriages leading to health issues, and more than that, she had no emotional connection with this cousin. The thought of marrying him felt forced, unnatural, and deeply unfair. This was the first quiet ripple of resistance in what would soon become a storm that would change her life forever. Her refusal came almost instinctively. The moment her parents mentioned the cousin's name, a wall rose inside her. She explained firmly that she would not marry him or any cousin. She spoke of the risks she had read about, genetic disorders, family feuds, and the way such marriages often turned women into pawns for preserving wealth rather than building love. Her parents listened, their expressions tightening with each word. This was not the response they expected from the daughter they had raised to respect family traditions. For days, the house was filled with a quiet tension. Her father, usually calm, began to speak less. Her mother, torn between supporting her husband's choice and comforting her daughter, tried to convince her gently. They reminded her that family marriages were safer, that she would be among people she knew, and that cultural compatibility would make life easier. But her mind was already closed to the idea. It was during this time that an unexpected message arrived. A cousin she hadn't spoken to in years reached out to her on social media. He had seen a hint of the marriage plans and decided she needed to know the truth. His words were direct. The man her parents wanted her to marry was lazy, financially unstable, and interested only in using her as a bridge to Saudi Arabia. He had no ambitions beyond enjoying her father's earnings and the privileges of living in the Gulf. The revelation lit a fire in her. She felt betrayed, not only by the intended groom, but by the entire system that expected her to walk into a marriage blind. Her trust in Pakistani men, already fragile, began to shatter. In her mind, this was not just about one cousin. It was proof that most men back home were motivated by greed and convenience rather than genuine love or respect. When she confronted her parents with what she had learned, they were startled but not entirely convinced. They questioned the cousin's motives for warning her. Was he telling the truth, or did he have his own reasons for interfering? But she was certain of her choice now. She declared openly that she would not marry anyone from the extended family, and, in fact, she no longer wanted to marry any Pakistani man at all. Her announcement was like a spark in dry grass. News traveled quickly to relatives in Pakistan, and within days the phone calls began. Some pleading, others furious. Eventually, a few relatives went so far as to declare that they would cut ties with her parents entirely if she went ahead with such a marriage. The weight of the family's disapproval settled heavily over the household. Her parents were hurt by the backlash, but she tried to comfort them, saying that relationships so fragile they could be severed over a personal choice were not worth keeping. In her heart, she had already decided if she married, it would be to an Arab man, and once she made up her mind, she was not the kind of person to turn back. With her decision to marry an Arab man firmly set in her mind, she began to notice details she had overlooked before. Over the years in Saudi Arabia, she had interacted with many Arab families through school, her father's work acquaintances, and her own circle of friends. She admired certain traits she observed in some Arab men: their confidence, the way they spoke with authority, their polished manners in public gatherings. In her eyes, they seemed more refined, more worldly, and far less entangled in the village politics she associated with Pakistan. Her parents resisted her decision at first, hoping her determination would fade with time, but she had never been one to back down from a choice once her mind was made. Eventually, after countless tense conversations, they relented, though their approval was reluctant and shadowed with worry. The moment her relatives in Pakistan learned of this agreement, it created waves of outrage. Some accused her of abandoning her culture, others hinted at dishonor. A few relatives even threatened to sever all communication permanently. While the family tension simmered, she quietly began observing potential suitors among her extended Arab social network. It was then that she noticed her friend's cousin, a man she had met a few times at social gatherings. He was polite, carried himself well, and unlike many men she had encountered, he seemed genuinely attentive when she spoke. The thought of him lingered in her mind until she made an uncharacteristically bold move. She sent him a proposal herself. His response came swiftly and warmly. He admitted that he too had noticed her and admired her confidence and appearance. Hearing this pleased her, confirming that she had chosen someone who valued her for more than just family connections or wealth. Within weeks, discussions between the two families were complete, and arrangements for the wedding were underway. The ceremony itself was modest but joyful. She wore a carefully chosen dress that blended traditional elegance with modern simplicity. Guests praised the match, at least on the Arab side, and she felt vindicated. In those first weeks of marriage, her new life seemed to match the image she had painted in her mind. Her husband gave her freedom to decorate their home as she pleased, bought her small gifts, and took her out for dinners in the city. She felt as though she had escaped the restrictions of her parents' plans and proven everyone wrong. But with time, subtle changes began to creep in. It started with small comments, disapproval over her choice of clothes, questions about where she had gone during the day, or why she spoke to certain people. At first, she brushed these aside, telling herself that all husbands had preferences. Yet the tone behind these remarks was different. The warmth in his voice began to cool, and his easy smile appeared less often. She didn't realize it then, but the man she thought she knew was slowly revealing a side of himself she had never imagined existed. The shift in her husband's behavior became harder to ignore as weeks turned into months. At first, the restrictions seemed mild, a suggestion that she shouldn't go out alone, a preference for her to stay home when he was away. Soon, those preferences became commands. She was no longer permitted to meet friends, and visiting his parents was discouraged until it eventually stopped altogether. The walls of their apartment began to feel less like a home and more like the boundaries of a cage. It was during this period that she learned things about him that shocked her. The man she had thought of as composed and responsible turned out to be reckless in his habits. He drank heavily, often returning home smelling of alcohol, his speech slurred and temper unpredictable. Gambling nights with friends were common, and sometimes he would disappear for hours, leaving her alone without explanation. When he did bring his friends home, the atmosphere was uncomfortable. They were loud, crude, and far too familiar in the way they looked at her. She began avoiding the living room whenever they visited, retreating quietly to her bedroom to avoid their stares. Her absence from family gatherings and social circles did not go unnoticed by her parents. They would call to ask when she might visit, but she always had to give excuses her husband demanded she make. The growing isolation left her restless and anxious. She had once been a lively, confident woman, but she could feel herself shrinking, her voice growing quieter in her own home. As months passed without any sign of pregnancy, his criticisms sharpened. He made remarks about her worth as a wife, sometimes in front of others, and accused her of failing to give him an heir. She could bear the disappointment, but the humiliation cut deeper. She understood then that he saw her not as a partner, but as someone who existed to meet his needs, and when she failed in one of them, she became a target for his scorn. It wasn't just the words, his temper became more volatile. A misplaced item, a late meal, or a simple question could set him off. The first time he raised his hand, she froze in disbelief. It wasn't a hard strike, but it was enough to shatter the fragile trust she still held onto. From that day, she learned to move carefully around him, to anticipate his moods, and to avoid anything that might provoke his anger. There were darker fears as well. She had overheard fragments of conversations between him and his friends. Talk of selling women, of making deals with certain men. It sounded like a world she wanted no part of, a world where human lives were commodities. She never dared to confront him about what she heard, but the suspicion lodged itself deep in her mind. Each day in that house felt heavier, and the freedom she had once valued so fiercely seemed like a distant memory. Her life settled into a suffocating routine. The once bright rooms of the apartment now felt like dim corridors that led nowhere. Days blurred together, filled with silent chores, long stretches of waiting, and the constant weight of uncertainty over what mood her husband might return in. She would watch the clock tick toward evening, dreading the sound of his key in the door because it could mean anything. A drunken rant, a cold silence, or a sudden demand. The isolation was complete. She had no permission to step outside without him, not even to run simple errands. Visiting her own parents became an impossible wish. The few times they called and suggested stopping by, he always had a reason to refuse. He claimed he was protecting her, but she knew it was control, pure and deliberate. Her phone conversations with her family became shorter, always under the pressure of knowing he might be listening. One afternoon, her parents unexpectedly arrived at the building, desperate to see her. They had brought gifts and food, their faces hopeful, but her husband met them at the door and told them she wasn't home. She heard the exchange from the other room, Sanai Sam, the sound of her mother's voice faltering, her father's quiet disappointment, and it tore at her. She rushed toward the door, calling out, but he grabbed her arm and forced her back inside. When she resisted, his hand came down hard across her face. The shock left her trembling, and the sound of their footsteps leaving felt like another lock clicking shut on her freedom. Then came the olive oil. One evening, he returned with a bottle of thick, golden liquid and placed it on the table in front of her. He ordered her to drink it. She hesitated, saying she disliked the taste, but her protest meant nothing. He poured it into a glass and watched her until she swallowed it all, gagging at the bitterness. From that day forward, the ritual became daily. At first, she assumed it was some misguided health habit, and olive oil was known for its benefits after all. But the way he insisted, measuring how much she drank and watching her afterward, felt strange. He never explained, only said it was good for her and that she should stop asking questions. The taste haunted her. It left her nauseated before meals, and even afterward she found it hard to eat. As weeks passed, she began to notice subtle changes in her body. A fuller glow to her skin, a slight firmness in her figure. He seemed almost pleased by these changes, inspecting her closely and muttering to himself about progress. She didn't understand the purpose, but the sharp focus in his eyes made her uneasy. It felt as though he was preparing her for something she wasn't meant to know about until it was too late. Her unease grew with each passing day. The olive oil had become more than an unpleasant routine. It felt like a deliberate ritual, something he valued far beyond its supposed health benefits. His gaze lingered on her in ways that made her uncomfortable, not with the warmth of affection, but with the cold calculation of someone assessing a product. She tried to dismiss the thought as paranoia, but deep down she knew there was an ulterior motive. One evening she reached her breaking point. The glass of oil sat in front of her, the heavy scent rising with each reluctant breath. She pushed it away, refusing for the first time in weeks. "I don't want this," she told him, her voice trembling. The moment the words left her mouth, his expression darkened. He moved swiftly, snatching the bottle and forcing it toward her lips. When she resisted, the glass slipped from her hands, spilling its contents across the table. The thick golden liquid spread like a stain of defiance between them. For a moment, there was silence. Then his voice came, low and venomous. "Do you think you have a choice?" He leaned closer, his eyes sharp and unyielding. "You will drink it because I said so. and you will keep drinking it until the day you leave this house." The phrasing struck her. Leave this house? Her pulse quickened. She demanded to know what he meant. At first, he dismissed her questions, but her persistence triggered his temper. In a burst of cruel honesty, he revealed the truth. The olive oil was not about her health or beauty for his sake. It was about preparing her for someone else. Her mind reeled as he explained that he had struck a deal. There was a man, wealthy and willing to pay handsomely, who wanted a woman in prime condition. One with vitality in her skin and body. The olive oil was meant to make her look vibrant, fresh, desirable. She was not his wife to love, he said. She was an investment, and soon he would be collecting his return. The words hollowed her. She sat frozen, her heart thudding in her ears. Any illusion of safety she had clung to was gone. The controlling rules, the isolation, the calculated inspections, it all fit into place with horrifying clarity. She wasn't a partner in his life. She was merchandise being polished for sale. When he handed her another glass of oil that night, she didn't argue. She drank it silently, each swallow burning with the knowledge of what it represented. Inside, she felt her spirit splinter. The vibrant, outspoken woman she had once been was fading, replaced by someone who no longer had the strength to fight. She went to bed without speaking, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. Sleep didn't come. All she could think of was how to escape a fate she hadn't chosen, and whether there was even a way out at all. Days passed under a heavy shadow. She moved through the apartment like a ghost, performing tasks mechanically while her mind churned in panic. Every time her husband left, she would scan the rooms, searching for a possible escape. A hidden spare key, an unlocked window, anything. But the apartment was a fortress, and his watch over her was relentless. Then, one afternoon, the unexpected happened. The doorbell rang, and her husband's demeanor shifted instantly. He went to answer it, and she heard a familiar voice, one she hadn't heard in years. It was her friend, a woman she had grown close to in the early days of living in Saudi Arabia, someone who had returned to Pakistan after marriage. She had no idea her friend was back in the country, let alone in the city. Her husband greeted the visitor with exaggerated politeness. The reason was clear. This woman was his cousin, and in her presence, he had to keep up the mask of respectability. But his hospitality did not extend to his wife. Within minutes, he found an excuse to leave the living room, seized her by the arm, and forced her into the bedroom. Without a word, he ripped a strip of tape from a roll and pressed it firmly over her mouth. Before she could react, he locked the door from the outside and returned to entertain their guest. The room felt smaller than ever. She struggled against the tape, her hands trembling, heart pounding in her ears. She knew her friend might not suspect anything. Her husband was skilled at keeping his cruelty hidden. The thought that her one chance at help could walk away without knowing the truth filled her with desperation. She searched frantically for the duplicate key she had hidden months ago, but it wasn't in its place. The only option left was noise. She began pounding on the door, harder and harder, ignoring the sting in her palms as they turned red. At first, there was no response. Then suddenly, the lock clicked. The door opened, and there she stood, her friend, eyes wide with shock. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Then her friend stepped forward, tearing the tape from her mouth and pulling her into a tight embrace. "What is going on?" she demanded, glancing over her shoulder toward the hallway. When she heard the sound of her cousin moving about in the other room, her expression hardened. In a voice low but fierce, her friend told her to get her things. She didn't hesitate. While she gathered a small bag, her friend confronted her husband in the living room. Words flew, sharp, accusatory, laced with threats of police involvement and legal action. He tried to laugh it off, but her friend didn't waver. She made it clear that if he laid a hand on his wife again, the drive to her parents' home felt surreal. She sat in silence, her friend's reassuring presence beside her, the hum of the engine steady against the pounding of her heart. She kept glancing at the road ahead, half expecting to see her husband's car following them, but there was nothing. Only the open streets leading her away from the prison she had lived in for far too long. When they reached the familiar front gate, her friend didn't need to knock. The moment her mother appeared, the narrator broke down. Tears streamed uncontrollably, her voice catching in her throat as she clung to her mother like a child. Her father came into the room, his face lined with worry, and for a long time they simply held her, no questions asked. Her parents didn't scold her, didn't remind her of the warnings they had given before her marriage. Instead, they comforted her with a quiet acceptance that cut deeper than any reprimand could have. Their support was unwavering, and in that moment, she realized the depth of their love. The walls she had built in defiance years ago began to crumble. She stayed in her old room for the first few days, sleeping deeply for the first time in months. Her friend visited often, checking on her and ensuring she was eating. Gradually, she began to talk about what had happened, the control, the violence, the humiliating routine of the olive oil, and the horrifying revelation of being prepared for another man. Each time she spoke, her parents listened with patient grief, their hands folded tightly as if holding back the urge to storm out and confront him themselves. The divorce was swift. With her friend's help and her father's determination, the necessary paperwork was completed in a matter of weeks. When the final document arrived, she felt a wave of relief, but also a quiet sadness for the dreams she had once tied to that marriage. It was a chapter she had to close, no matter how bitterly it had ended. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected began to shift inside her. She had once believed that Pakistani men were selfish and opportunistic, painting them all with the same brush because of one cousin's greed. But living again under her parents' roof, she saw kindness in her father's care, loyalty in her brother's protectiveness, and respect in the way male relatives treated her mother. Her assumptions began to soften. One afternoon, extended family members visited. Some of the very people who had cut ties when she chose an Arab husband. To her surprise, they embraced her warmly, speaking as though no rift had ever occurred. It confused her at first, but also humbled her. She began to see that not all relationships were fixed in bitterness. Some could be mended with time. Her days were quieter now, filled with familiar voices and the gentle rhythm of a household that wanted her to heal. She didn't yet know what her future would hold, but for the first time in a long while, she felt safe enough to imagine one. Life in her parents' home began to mend her spirit. Surrounded by familiar voices and gentle care, she slowly started to smile again. Among the relatives who visited often was the cousin who had once warned her about the greedy suitor years ago. Now a doctor, he was calm, respectful, and never asked her to relive the pain of her failed marriage. Instead, he spoke to her like an equal, asking about her interests and sharing small stories from his work. One afternoon, her father came to her quietly and said, "This evening, we've arranged your nikah." The words stunned her. She hadn't expected such a step so soon, but the trust she had regained in her parents made her stay silent instead of questioning the decision. When she asked who the groom was, her father only smiled. That evening, dressed simply yet elegantly, she entered the room and froze. Sitting beside the nikah registrar was her cousin, the same man who had once protected her from a disastrous match. He met her gaze with a warm, steady smile, one that held no judgment, only respect. The ceremony was brief, the vows spoken without hesitation. Later, she learned that he had asked for her hand not out of pity, but because he admired her strength and wanted to give her the life she deserved. For the first time in a long while, she felt a quiet sense of hope, the kind that grows from trust rather than rebellion. From the very first day of her second marriage, she noticed the difference. Her new husband treated her with a gentleness that felt almost unfamiliar after the turmoil she had endured. He listened when she spoke, remembered the little things she liked, and never once tried to control her movements or silence her voice. For the first time in years, she could breathe without fear. Life settled into a rhythm of quiet joy. They explored places together, often visiting scenic spots she had never seen in Pakistan. He encouraged her to reconnect with friends and relatives, reminding her that her world was meant to be bigger than the walls of a home. When their daughter was born, his joy was boundless. He cared for the baby with the same tenderness he showed her, proving that fatherhood was as natural to him as kindness. Her parents, once heavy with worry, now smiled easily in her presence. She often caught them watching her with quiet satisfaction, as though reassured that they had finally given her the life she deserved. Looking back, she saw her first marriage as a harsh lesson, one that taught her the value of trust, the importance of family guidance, and the danger of judging entire groups of people by the faults of a few. She carried those lessons forward, determined to raise her daughter with both independence and wisdom. Her days were now filled with gratitude. She had fallen once, but she had risen again, stronger, wiser, and finally at peace.